Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Aditya here. In our previous session, we have learned about IAM users, groups, and roles. And in this session, we are going to do a deep dive in IAM policies. So, we are going to learn IAM policies in depth here. Understanding IAM policy structure and permissions is essential in AWS. This is how you can provide permissions to your AWS users, services, and groups. We'll discuss them in depth in this session. First, we'll start with IAM policies overview. As I mentioned, IAM policies define permissions in AWS. If you want to permit a particular user to access a resource, you have to attach an IAM policy. If you want to permit an IAM resource to access another IAM resource, then you have to provide an IAM policy. And if you want a group to access some AWS resource, you have to permit that group to access those resources by using IAM policies. Okay. And these policies, as I mentioned, can be attached to users, groups, and roles. Users are individual user inside the account. Groups are nothing but a group of users, and roles usually for a particular resource, right? Instead of an actual physical user, like an user in AWS usually represent to an actual physical user, right? But if you want a particular AWS resource, for example, EC2 want to access S3, two different AWS resources, then you have to attach a EM policy to that EC2 to access that S3 bucket. So in that case, the policy should be called as role. So that's the difference. Okay. As I always mention, follow the least privilege principle. Don't provide extra privileges to the resources. Please provide only the permissions which are required to the users. So follow the least privilege principle. Okay, so first we'll try to understand the policies at different levels. Okay, we have group level policy, user level policy, and multiple policies. First, group level policies. As you know, you have a group of users, right? A group is nothing but it should consist of multiple users. So if you attach a policy on to a group, that policy should be applicable to all the users inside that group. So apply to all members. And user level policy. For example, you have a user created inside your AWS account and that user alone have attached an IAM policy. So in that case, that policy is at that particular user level only. So if you want to attach a policy which was specific to that user and you don't want to use the same policy to other users, right? Then you have to attach this policy to that user only. And usually in AWS term, we call these kind of policies as inline policies. And finally, multiple policies. So usually users within groups will applicable to this multiple policies thing. So if you attach a policy to a particular group, okay, and that policy will be applied to all the members in the group. Now, the same user in group, for example, you have three groups, group A, group B, and the same user, Aditya, can be present in group A, group B, group C. This concept we have already learned in the previous session. The same user can be present in multiple groups. And all the groups should have different IAM policies attached and all these permissions applicable to Aditya because Aditya is part of all the three groups. So in that way, you will get multiple policies. Okay, so these are different levels of policies, and I hope you understand what levels and how these policies will be applicable to a user. And moving on to the next slide, we'll start with an example. If you learn through examples, you will get better clarity. Here we have developers group, Adi, Bob, and Kevin. And these developer groups inherit developer policy. So you have an IAM policy named developer policy. You attach the policy to developers group. Similarly, you have testers group. Here Murali and Shiva are testers. And you attach a policy to these testers called testers policy. And you have a group called operations group and where Shiva and Kevin are part of operations group also. If you see, Kavin is a part of developers group and Shiva is part of tester group. And now Shiva is part of operation group and Kavin is also part of operation group. And they have one more policy called operation policy. We attach it to this operation group. Now you may have some users, for example, like Hari, who are not belongs to a particular group. Then in that case, if you assign any IAM policy to Hari, that policy should be considered as inline policy. Now we will see a flowchart so that you will get better clarity. So here, as I mentioned, you have developers. This is a developers group. In this developers group, you have Adi, Bob, and Kevin. And we have attached a policy called developers policy to these three users. And you have another group called testers group where you have Shiva and Murli are the members of these testers. We attached a policy to the testers, right? This is testers policy. And you have one more group called operations group. In operation groups, you have Kavin and Shiva. And operation groups itself, it has own IAM policy. Now, if you observe here, right, Adi and Bob and Kevin should have developers access. Shiva, Murli have testers access. And along with Kavin and Shiva have operation access. Now Kavin should have developers access and operation access. And Shiva should have operations access and testers access. Since Shiva present in testers and operations, he will get these two policies attached to him. And Kavin present in developers and operations, so these two policies attached to Kavin also. This is how the policies works in different levels. And also, as I mentioned, you may have a user called Hari or some user who is not a part of a group. And if you want to attach some IAM policies only specific to that user, that is called inline policy. And this is how it look like. Okay, I hope you understand these policies levels, right? By using this example. And moving on to the next slide, that is IAM policy structure overview. So we are talking about IAM policy, IAM policy, IAM policy, but you didn't see how IAM policy will look like. So before going through IAM policy, right, first understand what are the key things which are present in IAM policy. So these three things will present in IAM policy. One is the version, ID, and statement. So among these three version is an policy language version which will be constant usually, and this is a constant value. And ID is an optional identifier for the policy. Since you want to uniquely identify your policy, you can use an ID. That is an optional thing. And the core thing you have to remember is the statement. So if you see here version, ID, and statement. So statement is the thing we are interested in. And we will like if you are generating any IAM policy, you will have multiple templates, and version and ID usually automatically populated. But the statements are the things we need to generate or we need to create, right? And we'll go through these statements in depth now. And if you observe, statement is an array. So that means you will have multiple objects inside the statement. So statement is nothing but it has multiple statements inside it. Okay. So we'll go through each and every field inside the statement and understand how they works. Okay. So we'll break down. First, you will have SID, effect, principle, action, and resource. And optionally, you can have condition also. And if you see the statement section. So now I zoomed in the statement section only here. Okay. So if you see the statement section, right, you have SID. SID is nothing but optional identifier for the statement. So it's an identifier. You can have multiple statements. So uniquely identify a particular statement, you can give an ID. And the second thing, the most important thing is effect. Either allow or deny. Okay. So you are allowing a particular action on a particular resource, right? If you say allow, you are allowing a user or group or a resource to access a particular resource. For example, it may be access, update, or anything. You will have different card operations, right? So you can access a particular resource, or you are denying the access also. So two things only, right? Allow or deny. That is effect. And principle. Principle is nothing but specifies who the policy applies to. So here you need to mention which user this policy we are going to attach. whether a particular user or particular group or particular resource, that information should be added here. So in this case, we added to our root account itself. So our root account, we are saying allow. Effort is allow for this root account. Now, if you go to action, list the API calls permitted or denied. So here it shows a list of API calls, right? These API calls are nothing but actions performed on a particular resource. Okay. And you have resource, right? Resource is nothing but specifies resources the action applies to. So this action and resource are tied. So we are saying for this principle, we are allowing or denying, so based on the effect. If you say allow, it will allow, or if you say deny, it will delay. You are allowing these actions on this resource. The resource here is S3 bucket, and that's where the actions are listed here. S3 API calls, right? You are able to get an object from the S3, and you can able to update an object into this S3 bucket. So that's the information, right? For this particular resource, user or group, we are allowing these actions on this resource. So this principle can able to fetch an object from this bucket, and also this user can able to upload an object into this bucket. So that is the meaning of the statement. I hope you understand the statement section of the IAM policy, which is the core component in the IAM policy, and you can have multiple statements like this, and you can define multiple resources, allow user to access multiple resources. So this is how you can give permissions, right? And you can able to apply conditions also. So this is an optional parameter which can come here, and based on a particular condition, there are some conditions we can apply on the resource, so that when the condition meets only, this statement will apply to that resource. So you have this optional conditional rule, optional condition rule also, and we can apply them if you need. We have covered all the major components or fields in the statement block. I hope you understand about the IAM policy and how important it is to apply permissions to the users, groups, and services. And when you are applying IAM policies, keep in mind assign policies based on business needs. Don't give all the policies to all the users. Only assign policies based on business needs. And you have to use IAM best practices. Always use IAM best practices when you are applying IAM policies, and also apply the least privilege principle. Always apply the least privilege principle as I mentioned earlier. In summary, policies defines what actions users can perform, right? So it's like giving permissions to the users or groups or resources. And use group policies for scalability. For example, if you give inline policies for 10 users and that policy defines only the same axis, so in that case, it won't make sense, right? It is redundant. For example, you have a bunch of developers, and for each and every developer, you are giving access to same S3 development S3 bucket, right? And you have to repeat the same IAM policy to all the 10 or bunch of developers. And if you create a developers group and assign that policy to that group, then all the developers should be attached to that group so that they will inherit that policy. So that will scale, right? Even if a new developer came, you can easily add the developer to the group. So this will increases the scalability. And you have to understand the key IAM policy components, right? That is essential. And we have already discussed about the core component statement. Inside we have SID, effort, principle, and action, and finally resource, and even condition. Even though we haven't seen the concrete example there, we know based on some condition this statement can apply, right? So I hope you understand about IAM policies and how the structure will look like. It is just a simple JSON document, right? It's look like a simple JSON document, but which plays a key role in providing permissions.